speaking of the Fast and the Furious, Anna Claire, Fast and the Furious star Tyrese Gibson
brought this up on purpose because everyone knew it was just to shame me.
Slams Hollywood for trying to normalize the devil. We need to be more vocal about Jesus. Well, he's not wrong that they're very, very weirdly open about the devil. He actually mentions in the interview, I wonder if we can play the clip. If it's on Twitter, I think we're usually okay. I'm going to play this clip, and if we get copyright, I'm going to just clip it out later, guys. But let's watch this and see what he says.
Supposed to be promoting this movie and talking about my album. I just feel like we're in competition right now because they are trying to normalize the devil. They are trying to the devil is on the main stage at award shows and in every video and signs and symbols. And I said,
I think he's talking about a very specific pop performer right there. That's my personal analysis.
What? We need to stop treating our relationship with Jesus like the little buddy that you talk to before you go to bed at night, and not be more vocal about all the things that God means to us and all of the things that God has brought us through. Because there's been a lot of moments that you didn't post about. But yet how did God decide to get me through this?
Yeah, man.
I think there's a fundamental misunderstanding that he thinks that the world, that maybe America, that his audience is more religious than it is these days, or at least the Hollywood mainstream is not religious anymore.
Yeah.
Like, I think that's the problem, that America is still overwhelmingly religious, right? I mean, it's in less numbers than it was, but it's still a very religious country, right?
And our relationship with religion has changed. I mean, there are a ton of people who still identify with some type of religious group, even though they also openly report that they don't attend religious services.
Yeah.
I think that the cultural identification is still there.
Do you think part of this is that because he doesn't realize that Hollywood is as anti-religion as it is, or do you think he's just trying to push back slowly?
No, I think he's just being honest about like how he feels. I think there are people who feel comfortable talking about their faith, especially in Christian groups. I tend to notice it in people who grew up in more evangelical culture. They tend to be more comfortable saying like, the devil is here and we should resist that, right? Because it's a language and a way of communicating that is inherently part of how they practice. I think sometimes people refer to this as being like charismatic. I think people who grew up in more kind of traditional religions don't discuss faith as openly often in this evangelizing way. Maybe he is feeling comfortable speaking about it because so many people are starting to feel frustrated with a lot of the current mode and the current attention. But this might just be something he talks about in all aspects of his life anyways, and just now has brought it up on an interview, right?
Do you think it would be better if Hollywood pushed more? Like, we talked recently when Aiden was on, where I kind of pointed out that he pointed out that the Hollywood's push away from religion is actually more sudden than people realize. Like, if you go back and look at shows 10 years ago, there was still a decent amount of like shows portraying Christian or Catholic families that weren't seen as completely awful. Now it feels like you don't see any of that. Like, there's no push to show any amount of Christianity or Catholicism in any type of positive light at all.
Yeah.
Like, it feels recent and it feels very, very intentional to me.
Christians are the bad guys. It was The Last of Us TV show where they were trying to portray the cannibal group as like, oh, they're Christians and this is why they're bad. And it's like,
yeah, I disagree with the analysis that even 10 years ago we had Christians who seemed good. I think, that would be the 2010s, and I think 2010s people are like, you can kind of have Christians or Christians specifically who are like, okay, but ultimately all are kind of confused or do something wrong. I think there's still very anti-religious sentiment. I also think that, that's not an entirely terrible observation, but we have to remember all the cultural mores that we have dropped as we have become a less practicing society. So like, think back to the 1950s. If you got a shot of any, couple in Hollywood, what was notable about their bedroom? There was not a double bed. They slept separately, right? Like, this was something that we didn't show because it was so taboo. I don't know that we need to move back that far, but it was a different culture. And as we have moved more and more into progressive ideas socially and away from sort of some of the taboos of religion, we stopped showing that. So like, way back in the day, the idea that you would have couples who are open about the fact that they're having premarital sex, that would not have made it on TV. And then we moved away from that. And maybe that's good and maybe that's bad. But ultimately, the degradation of Christian values in society has been happening for decades.
Yeah. It's hard because to me, I see it as one of those things where we do live in a society that you're allowed to believe in and hold whatever beliefs you want. And Hollywood, as private entities, is allowed to push whatever values they want, it seems like. But the problem is we've given them so much power, and they've grown to be the infrastructure of the industry is so all-encompassing to our culture now that they're able to push things that may not be the best thing for us to hear, and they can do it to everyone all the time. And I don't know if it's one of those things that I can realistically see going back. Like, I don't see this I don't see it stopping, turning around, and going back the other way. It seems like these things only ever move in one direction culturally.
Well, and what I see now, like if you look at, I'm trying to think of a good example, but like any coming of age thing, every single one of the teen characters at some point sort of floats the idea that perhaps they are interested in the same gender, that they might be gay or whatever.
I always point out,
we never see any cool character who starts to dabble in Christianity and that be cool. Like we never see it go the other way. We just see the teens continue to lean more liberal in their understanding of everything. And I think that's
been going on even
the
longer,
problem
too.
because right, and a part of it is normalizing what they think everyone should be going through, but they say it's to represent. So you see yourself in the characters, but also they want you to see yourself in the characters because you start trying to think like them. You watch the show, you really like the show, and then maybe I experience these things that these characters experience. Like, which one is leading the other?
It really shows you how dangerous the industries like this are when you don't realize just how much control they have over. I don't know if it's mind control, but it definitely is. It pushes thoughts in a certain direction.
So that's the whole point, right? Like that's why they do it. They're telling you it's representation. It's not. It's because there is a world that some people would like to see, and they put it in television first and see it come later, right?
How do we fix it? Is it even possible? How do you move the culture back the other direction? If that is in fact what you choose,
I think we'd have to decide
do.
what parts of culture we want to take back, because I don't think we'll ever go back to being as conservative or as religious as we were at one point. On the other hand, what are the things that we do not like and want to give up? Because I think we see reactionary reactions to all movements everywhere, right? Like I think marriage is down in society. People enter into marriage later at an older age and less often now. They are more likely to live with someone, and often you'll hear that's because
I think that's Hollywood too. It's Hollywood. We talk a lot about how,
or is it in the is it a reaction to the no-fault divorce era, where suddenly we had a lot of divorces and people are now super cautious about entering into marriage because marriage no longer seems stable. Marriage seems like an unstable institution.
Maybe it's both.
Exactly. Yeah. There's a relationship between the two. I think ultimately our generation and the generations younger than us have to decide like what values we want to take with us. And I think you see that a lot in like the reactions to Target. And, we are starting to walk up against these things where suddenly people are like, oh, there is a line there. I am actually not willing to cross that line. I think for a long time, the idea that we were progressive or certain people's who had influence over media wanted to see more progressive societies. They didn't have a direction. They just wanted to push it as hard as they could. And ultimately, they find the line when people stop spending the money or stop wanting to understand. You know what I mean?
I think it's weirdly a mixture of both in a lot of ways. Like it's yes, maybe it is a lot to do with the no-fault divorce. Thanks, Reagan. Right? That's the one that Serge isn't here today. Serge would have loved to talk about this.
He should be working on his Reagan hip hop song.
He's got to be working on his Reagan hip hop song. Like maybe it's partially that, but also Hollywood doesn't make media anymore that shows any type of traditional family as something to aspire to. Like I said, I started watching this show called Joe Pickett, and I was shocked that they allowed the main character to be like a loving husband and good father. At least through the 4 episodes I saw before I needed Prozac because it was so damn depressing. But in general, it showed as like a character who's actually like he's not a bad person. Yeah. He loves his family, loves his wife and daughters, and you just don't see. It feels like you don't see a whole lot of that anymore. And most of what they're pushing, they like the idea of the chosen family rather than your actual family, because they always want you to disassociate or disown your traditional family, because a lot of times they picture that as problematic, or they point that out like, you're not your parents, disavow your parents and their values in favor of our more more progressive, more tolerant values, rather than looking to find some middle ground there where maybe you disagree with some of the things your parents say, but maybe they're not the reincarnation of Satan either. And it feels like that there's been a death of nuance when it comes to stories about family.
I think people have to grow up and realize that your parents are human too, and
Yeah.
that they will do things that are wrong and they will fail. And you don't have to live your life exactly like them, but you can have the wherewithal to see the positives and negatives and act with agency afterwards.
I remember reading, I think it was an article, but it was talking about like the moment you grow up is when you realize your parents are just full of crap like everybody else. They're just trying to get by.
Yeah, like they were just making it up as they went along, as many are when they have kids.
Exactly.
Right? What is a great example of a television show or a movie you think shows family in a great light? Other than the Fast and the Furious, of course. Because that's that whole new Hollywood.
I wouldn't know. It weirdly promotes like very strange sibling relationships.
Yeah.
I'm talking to you, Tokyo Drift. I don't know. It's hard for me to picture it one specifically, and I think that is actually because there are lots of different depictions of family, and we only hear that now in the context of like same-sex couples having children, but actually, you know, children who are being raised by aunts and uncles or by grandparents. Like, you can have a strong family dynamic even if it's not exactly traditional, right? It just depends on why your family's not traditional and how your family culture is strengthening you, as opposed to, you know, confusing you on the issue.
Sure.
Do you have a TV family that you look at?
Not so much TV family. Ironically, I would have said Shameless. Okay, hear me out. Like, yes, they're not good people. They do bad things, and I'm not talking about the last couple seasons either. That one went off the rails. But I mean, in the end, like, they still kind of cared about each other, and they still wanted to support each other.
Yeah.
But
someone in the chat is saying Malcolm in the Middle, and I feel like that's like somewhat good example. Like, parents who want to stay together and face challenges together. Like, that's cool. I think what bothers me the most is like we don't try and teach people like how to stay together. We don't try and cultivate that as anything, and that's what bothers me the most about Hollywood.
There's a $27.99 super chat. CA is Canadian, I believe. Canadian currency from Dave Gazzoli says, if you live in a society that's disembodied from being chronically online, it's harder to embody the values, Christian or otherwise, that make society successful and cohesive. I don't know. It's just a theory. Thoughts? I actually, one of the things that I've kind of gotten better at discerning when I'm looking at things that people are fighting about on the internet, or when I see arguments that get made, you have to be able to recognize when somebody or something is the product of being terminally online. Now, I would put J.K. Rowling into this category of the people that really, really hate J.K. Rowling are terminally online. I could even, if I'm being fair, the Ezra Miller stuff, in a way, is terminally online. I'm talking about it because it's the show, right? It's relevant to the industry that we're discussing. But the average everyday person doesn't give a crap about Ezra Miller. The movie's going to make $70 million its opening weekend, not because they don't like Ezra Miller, but because they don't care about The Flash.
Right.
Or because Batman is popular, but maybe not enough to sell a whole nother round of tickets. I don't know. I just know that there is such a thing as being terminally online.
$19.99 super chat.
And that is from Trucker and Tourist. He says, what a power hour. The dashing Britt Dasovic, the intelligent Chris Bertman, and last but not least, fierce Hannah Claire Brimlow. Question, which Shameless was better, US or UK? I personally like the UK version better. Chris?
I have not actually watched the UK version. I kind of want to check it out.
I really want to check it out. I only watched the first couple seasons of US Shameless and thought it was really interesting. But then I watched a later season and it seemed like it was super woke and went off the rails. Went off the rails in terms of storyline and then also political ideology. But
did you see, like, what's another example of a show that has multiple versions that people like? I like The Office. Did you see were you on the episode when we talked about the female-led Office that's coming in Australia? They're making a female version of The Office.
We talked about it briefly once when I was on.
They're making a female-led version of The Office.
I have to say, if you've worked in
I guess it's going to be Michaela Scott. I have no idea what her name is.
No, if you've worked in a female-led office, like, I'm sure there are some good ones, but my experience has always been negative.
Yep.
I just have to say it.
Yep. Wab Bilson says, but Ezra went on several rampages and assaulted women. Yes, the criticisms of Ezra are absolutely legit. I'm just saying it's the type of thing that the average everyday person isn't actually clued in on. That's terminally online. Another example of a show, I'm finally starting the show Being Human, which I've been recommended time and time again.
Okay.
But I'm watching the US version of that. Also, I do want to watch the Danish version of The Killing, which I've heard is far superior to the American version of The Killing, but I love the American version of The Killing because they do something incredible in that movie, or in that show. So Mariel Enos, I don't know if that's how you pronounce her last name, she's a gorgeous lady that they do very good work making her look just plain in that show. Like, you see her on red carpets and you're like, wow, they really were just like, you are a cop working in Seattle. Holy crap. like she looks very down to earth and drab because the show is depressing, right? So that's another show that everybody should check out if they get a chance. Brandon J. McLaren, other actors in there. It's very worth it. But a lot of shows that have US and UK or US and other versions.
Would you consider Black Mirror to have a US and UK version?
I don't know.
Because it started in the UK.
Yeah. Oh. Thank you, guys. Oh, by the way.
That one got me.
They can hear it downstairs.
Oh, I know.
Yeah,
I work downstairs.
It's party time.
I also think you are up here and you turn it up subtly all the time.
I'm picturing them with like glasses of whiskey as they're singing that. Like they've got one hand in their pocket and they're swaying as they're saying party time. Like, it's fantastic, right? Like, I also love that Ian like got excited about it and like went in there to do that. Like, Ian's the best.
Yeah.
Yep. Where were we? We were talking about
Black
family.
Mirror.
We were talking about before that.
I was gonna say we were asking about like values. Can things return? And I think ultimately we will see some kind of pendulum shift. And I think we can all name people who are kind of contributing to that. I think ultimately the same way that you say, like, do I want to spend money at a store that doesn't represent my values? At some point you have to ask yourself, do I want to take in content that doesn't represent my values? And I got this concept from a girl that I went to college with who was like, you know, pretty like evangelical Christian, and she wouldn't watch horror movies because she was like, that's the devil and I'm not going to let the devil into my mind. And I was like, I was raised in the Northeast. No one I know talks like this, but I'm loving the Southern culture here because I went to school in Texas. But I do think about that regularly. I've heard people say it about music. Like, if you're having a bad day,
it's how the devil gets inside you.
Sure, but like if you're having a bad day and you're only playing depressing music, maybe you should change your music because then you might change your mood. And I think that's similar. Like, if I want to live a certain lifestyle, not 100%, but maybe I should also consume content that is aligned with that, right?
You also get like those, like, it's always those like ridiculous studies that people post about that it's like, studies show that if you force yourself to smile, it will actually change your mood.
I'm not willing to commit to that kind of thing. That's crazy to me.
I know.
But like, I do think there is something to be said for like, if you want to see strong marriages or if you want to like learn about them, of course, you know, most TV shows are fictional, right? But like, also maybe try and seek them out. Or when you're watching shows where everyone is in a dysfunctional relationship, try to actively train yourself to be like, oh, this is why that dynamic is like that. Take in other content that helps you gives you a lens to analyze this.
And shows absolutely affect my mental state. Like, if I'm watching a show that's heavy in cynicism, which I try to avoid to begin with, it starts to affect my mood, right? So I have to actually be cognizant of that. So if that's happening to me, somebody who for work talks about how much this stuff matters and is very aware of it, it's got to be happening just as much to people that aren't really acutely aware of just how influential a lot of these mediums actually are. So. Thanks for watching. Listen to full episodes of Pop Culture Crisis on Spotify.
Keep up with us on social media and make sure you subscribe and ring that bell so you never miss the show. Bye, guys.